Alrighty, with the amazing response I got from my badly designed abilities episode and having teased it in the best designed one, I wanted to make a part 2 video because there's still a lot more to go over. On this channel, I try not to rehash the same topic too often since I want to make every video unique, but given how much you guys seem to enjoy these more controversial discussions, I suppose it's okay to expand on them every now and then. Incidentally, after you're done watching this one, if you want me to make a part 3, then check out the straw poll down in the description, and if I get a majority in favor of it, then I promise to deliver. But for today, we're gonna continue talking about some of League's worst abilities with badly designed abilities part 2. But before we get started, I want to give a quick shout out to today's sponsor, FaceCheck, another Overwolf app. As you guys know, I'm a big fan of Overwolf, I use it a lot myself, and this is one of the better ones they have. Unlike other apps that focus only on one section, FaceCheck is present during Champ Select, in-game, and post-game. In Champ Select, it shows you a list of stats, such as picks and bans, team stats, and even lets you see runes and item builds for the champion you're gonna pick. While in-game, you get a detailed rundown of every player on both teams, what rank they are, what their builds were last game, and whether they're autofilled, which, let's face it, every jungler is autofilled nowadays, along with other stats including damage spreads. So if you're up against a team that you're not sure if you need to focus on magic resist over armor, it will tell you how much physical, magic, and true damage you can expect from the enemy team. Finally, after the game is done, FaceCheck has a post-game analysis detailing your personal performance in comparison to your lane opponent and more, so you can see what you need to improve on. It's a really cool app that covers all of your bases, give or take, and if you're interested in using this to help yourself out in your games, I suggest you head on over to the link on screen or click it in the video description down below. It would support the channel a whole bunch and benefit you as well. Thanks again to FaceCheck for sponsoring the video. So just like the first episode, let me recap you on how I determine an ability to be badly designed, and as a disclaimer, it's largely based on perspective. As an example, if you're a Darius, Renekton, or Kayn one-trick, Yasuo's win wall is a non-issue for you, but if you're an ADC, then Yasuo's W is the work of demons. The way I like to judge if an ability is badly designed is predicated on a few things. For one, I'll be considering how the ability functions in a vacuum in addition to the context of the entire champion's kit. Reason this matters is because a champion's performance, good or bad, might skew one's perceptions of the ability in question. If said champion is overtuned right now, then whatever spell that causes you frustration will be all the more so, whereas if they have a 46% win rate, then it might be seen as an inconvenience at best. With that in mind, we're still using the same thought process as the first episode. A common way to tell if an ability is badly designed is if it monopolizes most of a champion's power budget or pressure, as in if it's disproportionately more impactful than the sum total of the other two, for basic abilities anyway. Another way to tell is if there's any issue with clarity. Does a powerful ability have a clear visual or auditory indicator? To show you what I mean, Jin's ultimate is extremely impactful because it has semi-global range and does huge damage to low health targets, allowing him to finish the job on any opponent that was able to get away with a sliver of health. Obviously, it wouldn't be fair for the opponent if a high-speed bullet sniped you down with no prior warning, right? That's why you can see the massive cone so you know your life is in danger, not to mention the violin that plays when he prepares to fire. That's what clarity represents. Depending on how strong an ability is, in the spirit of fairness, it should let the opponent know it's coming. Imagine if Pyke ultimate instantly casted. That wouldn't be too fun to go up against. One thing I didn't bring up in the first episode is if it discourages or removes interaction. There are a decent number of abilities in League that act in a way that makes the enemy team not want to approach or interact with you purely due to the potential danger that ability entails, especially if there's no feasible way to work around it. People like to give Veigar's Event Horizon a lot of crap for being impossible to dash through, but at the very least, the agency is on you to be light on your feet while trapped inside or skirt around it if you're outside. It only impedes your movement, not completely halts it. Kleptomancy was a rune that actively rewarded you for not interacting with your opponent because it gave you free gold just by throwing auto attacks. Ezreal would just Q spam on you over and over and over again and be rewarded for it, probably more so than the risk of trying to kill you directly. Klepto's a keystone rune, mind you, but that was the big issue with it. First Strike has its own problems, but it's much healthier than its predecessor since it forces you to interact with your opponent to get the most out of it. So now that we re-established the criteria, let's get into the list. But before we do, I want to go over 2 honorable mentions. We could only fit 5 abilities on the thumbnail, but I still had 2 others I wanted to go over. So I talked about it earlier, but Yasuo's win wall is one of them. Many of you can probably guess why. Though it has an obscenely long cooldown and does nothing otherwise, being able to block all projectile-based attacks for 4 seconds is not only incredibly powerful, but borderline unfair. Several champions, notably the marksman class, have nothing but projectiles to attack you with, and so a well-placed wind wall can be the same as disarming a champion's kit for an entire 4 seconds. It doesn't matter if the projectile is a caster minion bullet or a Lucian culling, any and every projectile that collides with this ability is rendered null and void. One might argue it adds thematic flavor since Yasuo is all about wind, and given that he's a melee champion, he needs some way to deal with ranged opponents. To that, I want to bring up Braum's Unbreakable, which is better designed because it doesn't outright block projectiles, it merely intercepts them and reduces the damage. Any negative effects are still applied, like crowd control and the like. Furthermore, Braum's E is very small in size, requiring him to position himself precisely in line with enemy fire. Yasuo's wind wall at max rank covers such a large area it's almost impossible to whiff. Completely invalidating a form of combat with the press of a button is just far too powerful. Sumira's W is guilty of this as well, but it's much shorter in duration and therefore in the same vein as Fior's Riposte, a reactive defense option, not nearly as bad. The other honorable mention is Gangplank's Remove Scurvy. Now, GP mates, hear me out, okay? Don't all of you press cannon barrage at my IP address, please. In the context of his kit, for someone with no mobility who is obligated to build full damage to be of any relevance in the mid to late game, he does need self-heal in some form. However, much like how marksmen and some mages have nothing but projectiles to which Yasuo's wind wall shuts down completely, a lot of champions depend on that one hard CC to do most of, well, anything. Being able to cleanse any and all debuffs on Gangplank means things like Mordekaiser Death Realm, Morgana Binding, Nasus Wither, Leona Stun, and so on are of no consequence to him. So you might be wondering why I listed Gangplank's Q and not Mundo's passive, which is kind of the same thing. Simple, Gangplank can selectively choose when to use his cleanse, whereas Mundo doesn't, at least not until the late game when picking up the canister is a full reset. The only thing that keeps GP's W balanced is that it's on GP. Imagine if it was on any other champion. So now we move on to the main event, starting with everyone's favorite jungler Kayn, that one kid in middle school who had an action replay or game shark and turned on the walk-through walls code. Mobility was always a delicate concept. Skills that allow you to travel at greater speeds for a brief moment are a powerful asset to have in a game predicated on positioning. Someone who can dash over a wall saves themselves a lot of time than if they were to have to take the long way around. Mobility can close the distance on opponents or escape danger, but even amongst the hyper-mobile champs like Akali, Irelia, Yasuo and such, their dashes and blinks are somewhat balanced, I said somewhat, by their fixed distance and or placement. Thus, you can gauge their overall threat bubble to some extent. For Kayn, you can't. Though Shadow Step isn't a dash per se, it is the ultimate tempo ability in the game. For 7 to 9 seconds, you effectively turn on wall hacks and can travel anywhere you want so long as you don't take damage from enemy champions. The reason people dislike Kayn so much during the Gore Drinker meta wasn't because of his insane burst damage, not entirely anyway. It was the ease in which he could get to his opponents. Shadow Assassin Kayn got 80% bonus movement speed and slow immunity on an 8-second cooldown while traveling through walls, making it near impossible for any champion to escape him or chase after him. Talon's wall parkour is kept in check by the fact that he can't travel over the same wall for a while after leaping over it. Kayn has no such restriction. Even with base Shadow Step, he has an endless number of gang paths while also having one of the worst user experience elements in the game. You know how there's like a circle that shows the enemy team where he is inside the wall? That thing is wrong like 90% of the time. It says he's gonna reappear here, then he pops up somewhere completely differently, which is a major clarity issue. You have no way of tracking his movements within the wall unless you have vision coverage of where he initially entered. Every other champion with bypass mobility is given heavy restrictions: Bard's Magical Journey, Talon's Parkour, Rek'Sai's Tunnels, even the newly introduced Hextech Gates. There's no one else in the game who can disregard terrain to such a degree. And to make matters worse, Kayn's a jungler. Shadow Step all but cancels out your need to optimize pathing and fast clears. He was easily the most elo inflating jungler during his prime because no other jungler could match his tempo. Up next, we have Illaoi's E, Test of Spirit. I talked about this multiple times in previous videos, and this ability was the main reason I brought up the whole discourages interaction clause at the beginning. Illaoi tosses out a skill shot that yanks the spirit of the first enemy champion struck, pulling it to her location, upon which it acts almost like a voodoo doll where a portion of damage inflicted on it is echoed to the original champion. If the tether breaks or the spirit is destroyed, the target is heavily slowed and cursed, spawning tentacles nearby that automatically attack them while the debuff is active. Test of Spirit may sound like a cool gimmick because one of Illaoi's greatest weaknesses is mobility. Outside of her ultimate, her tentacles are horrendously slow and easy to sidestep, and so having a target that stands still gives her quite a respectable neutral game for a juggernaut. Too bad paper almost never translates to practice. What ends up happening is that Illaoi does too much damage through Test of Spirit without putting herself at risk. Any melee champion stupid enough to engage on her while their spirit is pulled out will get slammed in the face with Leap of Faith and is pretty much guaranteed to lose. There's also nothing you can do to contest this either. Well, there used to be. Prior to patch 9.13, every time you dealt damage to Illaoi, your spirit would return to you faster. With that gone, your only option is to break the tether range, and then you have to spend 10 seconds avoiding the spawning tentacles. With Test of Spirit, she can attack you under the safety of her own tower since good Illaoi players usually have 2 tentacles under turret that melee champions can't destroy. Or if she has priority, she can harass you even if you're pushed to your tower because she pulls the spirit out of tower range. Ultimately, unless you play someone who can easily dodge her E or a ranged champion, Illaoi can pressure you out of lane with a single ability that you have no say over other than trying to dodge it. On that note, it would have made much more sense if her E was a hook. You would think a tentacle is good at grabbing stuff. I'd rather get pulled into range of her and have the option to leave her fight rather than her have an ability that lets her effectively exert free pressure. Moving on, you knew this was gonna be here. It's one of the most notorious ultimates in the game, and for good reason. Malzahar's Nether Grasp is the poster child of removing interaction. With the press of a button, his target is instantly knocked down, suppressed for 2.5 seconds while taking massive damage over time. It's a very simple ultimate but extremely powerful. Unless your name is Gangplank or Olaf or you have a Quicksilver Sash, for 2.5 seconds you're a sitting duck. Anyone within 700 range can be made useless with one press. No skill shot, no cast time, just point, click, and boom, you can't do anything. Lockdown abilities that last longer than 2 seconds are usually skill shots like Morgana's Binding or Ash's Crystal Arrow. It would have been pretty broken if a 3 to 3.5 second disable was point and click. Nether Grasp lasts 2.5 seconds, an extremely long time, and is a suppression, so you can't cleanse it with the Summoner Spell or Mikhail's Blessing. And since it's an instant cast, Malzahar can time exactly when he wants to lock someone down. You have no way of escaping either because it interrupts dashes. That's only half of the problem with this ability. The other half is that it locks Malzahar in place too, exposing him to any nearby enemy champions. In order for you to get the full channel, you yourself have to become useless in the process. Admittedly, I don't know of many champions that can survive an entire EQW ult combo, but if he's outnumbered or in a bad position, the other 4 members of the enemy team can screw him over if his own team doesn't protect him. For someone with the greatest anti-carry ability in the game, not many people play Malzahar because his ultimate is bad to use in disadvantage, despite being an ability that should be good in disadvantage. Nether Grasp is one of the few abilities that feels broken and helpless at the same time. Okay, 2 more to go. My throat's starting to hurt for some reason. Anyways, we're gonna talk about Gwen's Hollowed Mist next. Let's establish a bit of context first. Gwen belongs to the Skirmisher subclass. What are Skirmishers known for? Immense DPS, high stick potential, deceptively high endurance, and dueling. What are they weak to? Target selection. 1v1s, they're unstoppable since they only have to worry about one person. In teamfights, that's a bit harder to do since you're being attacked on all sides. There's also crowd control. Every skirmisher relies on their mobility to close the distance. If they get stopped in place by a Lux Q or something, they're much less dangerous. And finally, range. Skirmishers have short range, which is once again made up for by their mobility. As long as mages and marksmen keep their distance, they should be fine. Now, take those weaknesses and throw them out the window for 5 seconds. Gwen creates a friend zone that renders her untargetable to all enemies outside the area, and that zone repositions itself up to 1 time if she leaves it. So remember the Lux Q? Useless. Remember keeping her distance? Irrelevant. Remember target selection? Gwen is immune. If you want to hurt her while this ability is activated, you have to enter her little friend zone. Now, let's say you feel confident in your ability to take her head on at point blank. Gwen gains bonus armor and magic resist based on her ability power. Hollowed Mist is Yasuo's wind wall on anything ranged, not even projectiles, just anything. People meme about it all the time, but no, for reals. Gwen's W is Xin Zhao's ultimate in every sense of the word, but it's better since instead of taking 0 damage, she's just immune to any and all hostile effects out of range for 5 seconds. League's most powerful engage tools like say Vex ultimate, Nautilus ultimate, Bard Tempered Fate, Ash Arrow, Vars Chain Vi ultimate, none of those can be used against her because she dodges all the skill shot ones and the point and click ones. Well, you can't click on someone who's untargetable. The thing with untargetability is that it's partially balanced by its short effect duration, most of them lasting a second or less, and then you have Gwen's W which is a full 5 seconds, and you can't really say she's still targetable in melee as a defense because 1, it's intended to counter range, and 2, she's a skirmisher, she wants you to be in melee range. Remember the discouraging interaction clause, it's another ability that basically screams you can't interact with me for 5 seconds. Finally, we arrive at the last badly designed ability for this video. And guess what? Yet another ability that discourages interaction. Wow, who would have thunk? Tryndamere's Undying Rage is easy to understand, which means it's also easy to understand why it's terribly designed. On cast, he gains a huge burst of fury, and for 5 seconds, he literally cannot die. Doesn't matter if you use an execute like Pike or Urgot ultimate or if he's tower diving you, his HP will not drop to 0 under any circumstances. Adding insult to injury, he can cast this while under crowd control, at least against Malzahar, Gwen, Illaoi, and Kayn. If they get stunned, knocked up, or silenced, they can't use their respective abilities. But with Tryndamere, even if he's suppressed, he can still use his ultimate, meaning the only thing that can cause him to die prematurely is if the player doesn't press it in time. Tryndamere is not the most dangerous champion in the game. Being a skirmisher, all you have to do is kite him out or chain CC him during those 5 seconds and he will die. But the problem remains that for 5 seconds you have no choice but to not interact with him. I mean, if you're playing a super beefy tank like Malphite, an extra 5 seconds of him auto-attacking isn't much of a problem. But to everyone else, it is. Tryndamere's damage accelerates to a level where he can 2-shot any squishy target in the late game. Being able to do that with no fear for his life goes against the very fundamental nature of how League of Legends is supposed to be played, to avoid dying as much as possible. More than half of all champions in League straight up don't have the necessary means to keep him away from them for that long, especially considering his spinning slash has virtually no cooldown in the late game. At the very least, Master Yi can be easily shut down with burst damage or crowd control, so even though I talked about Alpha Strike in the previous episode, Master Yi himself plays with a lot of risk. Tryndamere doesn't. If you don't have the right team composition to handle him, you lose. No amount of skill will change that. Okay, that brings us to the end of Badly Designed Abilities Part 2. Once again, I have a straw poll in the description down below that you can vote on to decide if you want Part 3. I don't mind making a little mini-series on badly designed abilities since there are so many of them, but that said, I kinda wanna space them out. I don't wanna just put them back to back to back. For the time being, let me know what you thought of this list, whether you agree or disagree with it. Just to remind you that what is considered badly designed largely comes down to perspective. A super tank like Cho'Gath or Sion might have no problems dealing with Tryndamere because they can face tank the damage, while a squishy Xerath or Ziggs might think he's unfair to deal with. My stance on this was to approach this with the most general opinion possible. Anyways, if you enjoyed the video, be sure to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel for more content like this, consider checking out my Facebook page if you want to see some extra fun content, as well as my second channel Vars 2 for discussion on Genshin Impact if by chance you play it. Aside from that, feel free to follow me on Twitter, join my Discord server, and check out my previous ability discussion episodes if you haven't yet. But for now, thank you all so much for watching, and I look forward to seeing you again soon. Take care.